Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident. Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Purdeep Sangha. Purdeep is widely known as a strategist, for businessmen and teaches men how to become the complete man. His personal mission is to help men grow their businesses massively, increase their personal fulfillment in life, and improve their relationships with their wife and kids. He is the founder behind the movement of men becoming mindful alpha males, men who experience complete victory and have it all. As an award-winning author, entrepreneur, speaker, podcaster, business coach, husband, and father, Purdeep knows exactly how tough it can be to balance a successful business with a happy family. After studying and working with some of the most successful men around the globe, Purdeep shows men the neuroscience behind becoming limitless. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Purdeep. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Well, thanks for having me, Dwight. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on again. So, Purdeep, I like starting out the podcast. I know a lot of people that do podcasting, and you're a podcaster. We talked, people will talk about, what's your backstory, and the automatic response for people to talk about what's happened to them since they become successful, maybe a little bit about their struggles at the beginning of their entrepreneur or business life or career or whatever it is. I like dialing it back though. And part of the reason I like dialing it back to the actual origin from when you were a child is my insatiable need to want to know more. And that started because of Marvel and because of the Star Wars series. It frustrated me growing up that they'd always start in the middle. And really, after the fact, they go back to the beginning years later. And it frustrated me enough so much that I decided when I started podcasting that I wanted to know exactly the inner workings of a person from a child right up to where they are today. So could you do me a favor and tell me the key things from your childhood to adulthood that led you to where you're at currently?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a small town on the west side of Canada, you could say. It's Kelowna, British Columbia. My parents were immigrants from India, and they immigrated over in the early 70s and had my brother and I. And they didn't have any formal skill, you can say. And so all they knew how to do was work hard. So they got a job on an orchard. And that's what they did for many years until they actually bought their own orchard and I got into business from that side. But I literally, my brother and I literally grew up on an orchard. So from the earliest memories that I have, I was on an orchard as a kid. My parents would put us in an apple bin while they'd be picking apples. So it was a very different environment. I worked in on an orchard while other kids were getting jobs in grocery stores, for example, and other places. Canadian Tire. I was working on the orchard, and I absolutely loved it. I loved being outside. I loved being in nature. I just a very mindful environment, a very free environment. So I was lucky enough, I would say, to grow up in that environment. My parents also pushed me to be, you can say, really good in academics because they said, we came here, we don't have education, we've had to struggle, do manual labor. We don't want you to have to do the same. So this typically happens with most immigrant families is they said, get an education, have a better life than we have. And so I was always good in academics as well. I worked hard. I have to say I got that from my parents, that work ethic. I started managing employees at 16. At 17, I was also a personal trainer. I was an academic tutor at a very early age. So I had this in me when it came to helping other people, a natural drive for leadership, understanding people's behavior. I think that really stemmed from my parents because I learned a lot from them. My dad was also a very, you can say, a very strong presence, very masculine man, big in stature, physically strong, very tough, but also a very emotional man. And I learned a lot from him, but he also struggled with alcoholism. And it was tough for our family because he was an amazing guy when he was sober. And then when he would drink past a certain limit, it was just a completely different person. And it was kind of scary growing up as a young kid, as a young boy, because I with a big man in the house, and he would have night terrors. So if he woke up in the middle of the night while after drinking, it was like a bomb went off, because he had something inside of him that was just, I guess, eating away at him. And it was a big challenge for him. And I was the only one in the household that could really connect with him and calm him down. I remember I would be the one that would put him to bed and sleep with him because there was just that, I guess he got some kind of peace from that. And so I started to study human behavior at that time, and especially men's behavior and how men and women operate, how do relationships operate, how do people operate in society. So I'm a very, you can say, I was a student from a young age, so I like to break things down and analyze things from human behavior to business to all different aspects of life. And that's kind of how I grew up. I was always good in academics. I went into study, you can say it started off in science because my parents wanted me to be a doctor, and I went in that, and I soon found out. So in my fourth year of university, I switched over to finance and business, and went in, got a job in the corporate world, and then that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
Wow. So you've had quite the journey, Kelowna. I love it. My as a side note, my daughter and fiance are moving there on Friday. I have tons of relatives that live in Kelowna. So
Oh, awesome.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm quite familiar with the orchards and stuff around there. That must have been a real interesting childhood to be sitting in a basket as a young person and then going through what you went through with. And I see that time and time again with academics being pushed. My mom and dad are first generation Canadian. I'm second, whereas you're first generation Canadian. So yeah, they push us to be more academic because again, they didn't necessarily have, and a society as teaches us that if you don't go to school and get a good job, you're not going to be successful, which in some cases that can be correct, but in other cases, you look at yourself, you went to school to do finance, and now look what you're doing, right? How many people statistically, I know in Edmonton here at the university, they say 65% of people that graduate after 4 years with a degree don't even work in that field, right? They end up doing something else. So really, what does education do for us? In my opinion, it teaches the people that we're going to work with, or it gives us confidence that we have the ability to think, be critical thinkers, think at a higher level. I know myself, electronics engineering background, I'm not in electronics. So I've been in finance now for 19 years. Prior to this, I owned a computer consulting firm. But yeah, I'm the same thing. I'm the same way. I wanted to learn about human behavior. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I spend a lot of time over the last 25, 30 years studying human behavior because I want to understand what makes people tick, why they act certain ways, why they, don't respond to certain things, to certain outside stimulus. And it's interesting too, what you brought up about your dad. My dad, super tough man too, come first generation Canadian, their families, my mom's family, his family all come from Germany. My dad was one of 18 kids. My grandpa was a super huge, big man. And same sort of, they want what's best for us. They push. And my dad was a workaholic because of it, because of what was instilled in him. So I didn't see him a lot growing up. So, from one variety to the other, you helping your dad through his, alcoholism and his night terrors and giving him comfort. Whereas me, I wish my dad was around. I get up in the morning, he'd be gone. I go to bed, he wouldn't be home. Right. So
Yeah.
it's just awesome. That's why I love listening to people's origin stories, because we all live different lives. And then the outcome of when we become adults is still dependent on us. We can't blame our parents like so many people do. right? We have to make a
Mhm.
decision we can be a product of obviously learned behavior, but it is up to us to decide if we want to move forward. So one of your personal missions is to help men grow their businesses. Does this require a lot of mental discovery, or is it mostly business process you assist on, or is it a combination of both?
Well, it's a combination of both, but it definitely is more on the personal individual side because if we take a look at the success level when it comes to business or even in personal life, life is basically a series of decisions and actions. That's what it is. And so the more decisions you make that are in line with your end goal, the faster you'll actually get there. Not necessarily the easier it will be, but you'll just be able to get through those challenges a lot easier. And so there's a number of different things that are included in that. There's a motivational element, there's a skill development, there's execution, there's innovation, there's sustainability, there's elements around the individual, which are then applicable to the business as well. So long story short, it's a combination of both, and that's why I've am doing the work that I'm doing is because it takes both to really grow a business successfully and at the smoothest level, I would say, because let's just say a typical business advisor would come in and be like, okay, this is what you need to do from a strategic perspective or a tactical perspective, lay out the plan, they'll go through it. But what ends up happening is a lot of people don't necessarily execute. Either the leader will not execute, or maybe the team will not execute effectively. And then you have to dig in deeper to find out why. What are these people thinking? What is the internal dynamics? What's the ecosystem of people's beliefs, for example? That's when things get a little bit tougher. And that's one of the other areas that we focused on to bring it all together, because ultimately it's people executing on the strategies and tactics. If the people aren't at the level where they need to be, then the strategies and tactics aren't going to be effectively executed. So we work both hand in hand with that. So long story short, it's a combination of both working on the individual and on the business strategies and tactics.
So do you have specific processes where you may have to handhold some people, or other people may get it right away and you can jump more into the business processes?
Yes, exactly. So over the years, because I've been studying this for over 2 decades when it comes to neuroscience and neuropsychology, is I've basically built a system in terms of how people operate. And so I can easily identify what level is not at the optimum level or what needs to be worked on. And so we take a look at that system, like step by step, to see what's actually impacting them, where they're falling short or where their biggest challenges are. I'll give you an example. For a lot of people, they have a great work environment, but they may go home to a challenging personal environment, or whether it's a relationship or in their family. And then they'll get caught up. They'll have one train of thought or thinking at work or in their business. And then when they come home, they fall into the same patterns because the relationship or the home life is that way. And so they have this challenge that because they're forward thinking one aspect, but they feel like they're getting drawn back in another aspect. So we have to work on all of those elements for a person to be able to progress forward uh, in their business, because your personal life and your business life are very closely tied together.
Yeah, I love that response. That is a great answer. In my own industry, it's the same thing. I have to sit down and figure out what is wrong between the 6 inches and why they've been on a hamster wheel so long. And most people don't get it, that your home life affects your career, your entrepreneurship, if you're a business owner. And yeah, you need to basically dial it back and figure out what's causing all your problems, because there's so many people today that live a facade once they live their house, and then they get back in their vehicle, they come home and they walk into their house and they're a completely different person. And when I know myself, when I sit with families and you start peeling back the layers of the onion, it's amazing what you see. And I've been, same sort of idea. You said 2 decades. It's about the same for myself. Um, Helping people discover that there is hope, and that's what I hear that you're doing. You're giving people hope that they can figure things out. And it's hard to digest and figure out a timeline. Like, I could say to you, well, how long does this take? Well, it's impossible for you to know, because you got to know how badly, I don't want to say damaged, how badly they're in need of uplifting, right? Because we use words that are really hard on our mental state that don't help when we use those words with others, right? I don't know if you agree with that or not. To say somebody, well, you're damaged, how does that make them feel? Right? It's not a
Yeah.
great word to use. So that's another thing I work on. I don't know if you do. Do you work a lot on what I call wordsmithing, and understanding that one word can damage, but you can use another word to mean the same thing and it uplifts? Do you work a lot on that as well over the
Yeah.
last two decades?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the areas that I've really taken in on the business side is innovation and marketing. And marketing is all about wordsmithing. It's all about getting your message across and communicating to your audience. And it's very important because what we say has an impact. It has an impact on a number of ways, because words are categorized in our human brain. And that automatically represents a meaning to an individual. But more importantly, how we communicate in our words is a form of two things. It presents information, but it also presents energy. And this is, we could take a look at it from a scientific perspective, or we can look at it from a spiritual perspective as both. And they're kind of intersecting, is that our words have energy. There's a frequency that's involved as well. So that's why our tone of voice, our pitch of voice, is even more important sometimes than the actual word itself, because our brains are trained and designed to receive that energy. Everything that we take in, whether it's our sight or taste or touch or smell or hearing, is changed into an electrical impulse in our brains, basic electrical signal. And that signal is based on some kind of a frequency. And so if we communicate in a more loving way, using more loving words, loving tones, that's going to be presented differently. That's going to be consumed differently by people. So words are absolutely important, because I come across this when I'm working with men, when they will say something about either themselves or someone else. And I have to sometimes correct them and say, you have to be careful what you say, because especially when it comes to our own brains, it's what's listening to us the closest. So if you're talking in self-defeating words, that's what's going to happen. And so for me, I have to be very careful, because I have to get a point across to someone and tell them they either have to change or do something different, without them feeling like they are damaged, or like they have something wrong with them, or like they're self-defeated. So it is very, very important to watch our words.
Yeah, I completely agree. I smiled while you were saying that, because I coach on body language and tonality, and people will say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I could literally say something to three different people, and three different people will hear something different, yet I said the same thing. But if I apply it a certain way, each person will still get the message they need by my body language, my tonality, and the words I use. I'll have more of a reach to their 6 inches to connect with them. And is it successful all the time? Absolutely not. We're not wizards. We're not magic. We can't just sprinkle dust on people and make a change. But I love your response. That was amazing. One thing I would like to add into that, what is your thoughts about saying things out loud? And the reason I mention that is I coach people to not just think between their 6 inches, their thought processes, even when I've coached them, to actually whatever, I encourage them to take notes, and I tell them to read it out loud, because I've found through my work of doing, coaching people between their 6 inches between their ears, that the more they say it out loud, the more their brain actually hears it, because your voice is actually heard. Whereas when you're just thinking it, it's harder for your brain already to differentiate between a lie and a truth. I find that becomes more prevalent in their thought process when they speak things out loud. Have you found that at all, or have you ever practiced that with your clients, to say
Yeah.
things out loud?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. And if we take a look at, again, at how our brain operates, we have so many thoughts that are going through our mind every single day. And scientists don't know, because it's anywhere from 15,000 to roughly 80,000 thoughts a day. So there's a lot of chitter chatter that's happening. And here's what individuals need to do. There's two elements in particular when it comes to thoughts. One is the frequency of thoughts. The other one is, you can say, the amplification or amplitude of thoughts, because the loudest voice in your mind will win. So therefore, the amplitude is important. And by saying it out loud, you are becoming the loudest voice in your head. And by repeating it, you are becoming, it's more frequent than the other, you can say, whispers in your head. There's something else, is actually writing it down as well, because our visual sense consumes 60% of our sensory, you can say, input into our brain. So as soon as you write it down, it has a bigger impact as well. There's a greater degree of clarification for our brains to categorize, and that's how our brain works. But that, just by seeing it, we're actually imprinting it into our brain as well, because thoughts can be very elusive. And we know that those whispers in our head, they're in, they're out, we say it and we might not remember it, but we know that, again, there's two levels of thinking that we have, the conscious level and unconscious level, that most of our thoughts, 98% of them, by estimate, by research, roughly is at the unconscious level. So what we are hearing and seeing at the conscious level is only a fraction of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Yet we're making decisions, we have impulses, and we have, basically, our actions are determined mainly by our unconscious thoughts. So absolutely, I highly encourage people to say things out loud, write them down, and repeat them, because that's how you actually change your behavior.
Yeah, I love that. To the listeners, I've just met Purdeep today, and it is uncanny how the universe brings people together that are like-minded. It's just uncanny. So I really appreciate your responses, because this is exactly what I coach and teach on. Obviously, your words are different. Hence why it's so important that I bring people on to Give a Heck that portray things differently, because people that's another thing. I don't know if you agree or not. I always joke on this, especially when I've been standing on stage and I'm talking to a few hundred people, and I'll tell them, I said, you know what your biggest problem is you guys are leader deaf. And they'll look at me and go, what do you mean you're leader deaf? Well, the biggest problem is we teach people our information. They're in our tribe or in our group, and they become leader deaf. So we need to take that information, the same information, and people say, well, I need to change my information so that they hear it. No, you take the same information and teach it to new people, right? You can't constantly think that teaching the same info to the same person, they're going to become leader deaf. They're not going to hear you anymore, right? People within your organization, or, people that come consistently to coach, eventually should get to a point where they're independent, in my mind anyway. Because if they're constantly coming to me and I'm telling them the same things and it's not sinking in, then there's a bigger problem than they realize or are willing to admit. So I really like that fact of what you were saying, though. So have you ever talked about it or thought about that people become leader deaf or become teacher deaf?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's just the way human beings are. We have a tendency, because, again, we adapt to things, and that's how our brain is trained. Once we get accustomed to something, we go on to the new things, because our brain likes novelty. And so that is typically what happens in life. That's what happens in everything. That's what happens in relationships. Why relationships lose that passion, you can say, sometimes, or the thrill, is because we become accustomed to things. And it's just a natural part of our brain and how it operates. We just need to be aware of that. As someone that's out there influencing others, it's important from a marketing perspective to constantly build your audience. And so that's important. You can't say the same things over and over again, or even differently to the same audience. It's important to grow that audience, because the population is changing, demographics are changing, and we have to continuously spread that word.
Yeah, that is so true. And I listen to what you're saying, and I think to myself, you and I get it, but the mass majority of the population don't, and that's why we're so needed. Right? They just don't get it. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that people get out of school, they're raised to get a good job, have 2.1 kids, 0.1 being the dog, a white picket fence, and a house, and then work your the 40 program for work for 40 years to retire and live off 40% of your income. Like it's to me, it just doesn't make any sense. But then again, it does make sense because of what our television shows teach us, what magazines teach people, what social media teaches people. They don't teach people to stretch outside of their comfort zone, because really success is on the outside of our comfort zone, right? And you know that as well as I do. So I really appreciate our conversation thus far. It's been great. So I'm going to see where this next one will go. So you also have a goal to increase your personal fulfillment in life, which I would think would inherently improve relationships with people, like men with their wife and kids, is a healthy outcome. Can you tell me what process you take men through to help them on the journey of personal fulfillment, and any success story that you feel comfortable sharing with somebody that you've taken through that process?
Sure. It's very simple. I'm going to simplify it here. Everything that we do from a fulfillment standpoint is based around feelings. And that's how we operate as human beings. We operate on feelings. If we have a sense of feeling of hunger, we will eat. If we have a desire or a feeling of needing to have sex, we will have sex. All of these things, again, emotion, love, happiness, joy, all of these things are what determine how we act more than actually just our thoughts. So our thoughts and emotions are very highly tied together. They're very cognizant. There's a lot of different theories there. Make decisions is based on our thoughts and our emotions. So what we do is we take a look at the level of emotions first, and we start with emotions. So I always ask guys, okay, so tell me, if you have the perfect ideal life, what 3 to 5 emotions would you want to feel on a regular basis? So some guys just want to be excitement, it might be passion. Other people, it might be peace, content, whatever it is. And then we say, okay, and that's going to change depending on your life cycle, your life stage. That will change. And so at that point, we'll say, okay, in 5 years out, this is how you want to feel. Okay, so what kind of lifestyle will actually help you get there? Because I'll give you an example. There's a young gentleman that was in 10, $11 million a year that came and asked me for, because I advise from an advising perspective, and we worked through things, and his goal was to hit $100+ million in his business. I said, that's great. And he probably would have. He had a great business. And I said, if we do this plan, for example, over the next 24 to however many years, we got to figure that out to get there. What emotions are you going to want to feel? How do you want to feel at the end of it? Well, I want to feel this, I want to feel that, I want to feel peace and content. And I said to him, hey, look, okay, you got $100 million plus business a year in revenue. Your level of peace and content probably is not going to be at the place where you want it to be. And when he thought about it, he truly got it, because he's dealing with enough challenges and problems with a $10 million business. And you 10 times that, not saying that the challenges or problems will be 10 times that, but he took a look and said, yeah, it's gonna, his challenges will be amplified. And so his level of peace and content isn't going to go up. It actually might go down. And so he said, when we restructured what he was looking for, he didn't need to be making that much more money. We just had to design his business a little bit different, so he had a little bit more freedom, and do other different things in his business in terms of structuring and his growth, or whatever that looked like, to actually help him get there. So it's working backwards, whereas most guys will start with a business or making money first, and then what ends up happening is they get caught in that trap, and they realize that they don't have that lifestyle, or even if they have that lifestyle, they haven't really talked about how they want to feel. So it's working backwards from that perspective. And then we take a look at things like, how motivated are they, what truly inspires them, what purpose they have, what reward systems that they need, are they at that skill level? So, but it fundamentally starts with the feelings and how people want to feel at the end of the day.
Wow. Yeah. Awareness is so key. It's basically what it boils down to. You're helping them become aware. Going from 10 to 100 million, that's key though. He talked about what emotions do you want to feel. Well, he automatically figured the more money he made, the better his emotions were going to be, and really that's not the case. I tell my clients that too. I have clients that make 100,000 a year and are happier than my clients that make 10 million a year, because they time themselves out and they have a core value system that's tied around having faith, family, and work in their life, right? And it's impossible to have a balanced life. I don't believe it's possible. I believe you can strive to always have symmetry or connection between the most important parts of your life. But yeah, it's amazing to hear you say that about somebody that figured they could be better off making more money. It just doesn't happen, because then they get so much more tied up into it. And I've had wealthy people that I coach, and they'll say, well, I'll just hire people when I have more money, and then I can hire more people to deal with this. Well, how about you don't make more money? You just figure out how your practice works better and implement better processes to live a better life right now, just like you said. So I love that. That is awesome. So you're the founder behind the movement of men becoming mindful alpha males. What does this accomplish for a man to discover his alpha male side, and why is it so important?
Well, it's important to have both because as men, it's built in us inherently through a drive perspective, genetically, to find, you can say, explore different things, to actually have a level of hierarchy, but also be the creators of our life, right? If we take a look at our natural, the movies that are out there, the people that we want to emulate, these are the men that have created their destiny. These are the men that have some kind of purpose in life. So the word alpha, for example, the term alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, for example, right? It means beginning, it means origin. And so that's important. And that because we are the origin of the lives that we want to create. So I have a firm belief that either you're an alpha male or you're not an alpha male. You either create your life or you actually get stuck with the circumstances that are given to you. And that can also be known as a follower. But there's nothing wrong with being a follower in certain circumstances. Like we grow up and we follow our father, for example. We might have an older brother that we follow as in the workspace. We have a manager. But in life, it's up to you to really create the life that you're looking for and be that alpha male, which is taking the lead. And the term alpha has been misconstrued because a lot of people think of a wolf pack, the leader of a wolf pack, and when they hear alpha male. Again, that's kind of like the marketed approach. Well, the whole purpose of being an alpha male is not just to accomplish what your own agenda. It's about taking care of who's in your pack, right? And who you're taking care of. That means your family. So if you're in a relationship, your spouse, your kids. So I firmly believe that a lot of men haven't taken that ownership very seriously. And especially in the US, over 50% of kids are being raised without full-time fathers. There's a big epidemic that's happening there when it comes to that. So we as a society need to reestablish that leadership in men, which is very important. But then there's the mindfulness aspect. And mindfulness is the awareness, the attention, the understanding that what we do today may have an impact on not just what's in front of us, but a ripple effect throughout time, because everything that we do has a significant impact. And from a Buddhist perspective, they say, make a decision as if the universe is going to be impacted, but also laugh at yourself as if it's actually going to make a difference, right? So you have to make decisions knowing that it's going to impact people, but also not take yourself so seriously as well. And mindfulness is very important. This is something that I grew up with because my grandfather was a very spiritual person. My grandfather immigrated over after I can't remember exactly how old I was, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He immigrated from India. He was in the Indian British Army for 3+ decades. Again, a very disciplined man, uh, just a very wise man in general, spoke 5 different languages, was educated from that standpoint, had fought through 2 major wars. But his father, so my great grandfather, was a spiritual teacher in India for 50 years. And so my grandfather was a very spiritual person. My dad was kind of borderline. He had the party side, but he also had a spiritual side. And when he came to Canada, for example, he was one of the only few people that can actually read the old textual language of the Bible. And people were actually pretty amazed. But long story short, I grew up with an environment of mindfulness being a big aspect of our life, which is being aware of how we impact ourselves, our lives, and the importance of living in the moment. And so that is another thing that needs to be added on. You can't just be an alpha male, because we have a lot of alpha males out there running around doing their thing, taking control, but they're not being mindful. They're not being fully aware of what the impact is and the ripple effect of other people through society or the environment or other beings around us. So it's a combination of that. When you have a combination of that, that's when things become very powerful for you in life. So it is, it's like the warrior approach combined with the spiritual approach brought together. And there has to be a healthy balance. And it's never perfect, but it's the ability to go on that spectrum and apply yourself based on what the situation is.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so true. Um, Interesting to hear about your grandfather and your dad, and it is so true though. We pick up and learn things. It's important though that we take the things that are good, that are going to help us level up and move forward in our lives, and so many people, listeners included, will pick up on the bad traits of our alpha or our father. And as you mentioned, there's so many, like my dad was a workaholic, as I mentioned, and initially when I was younger I became that workaholic. um, I guess my kids were blessed though. They weren't part of that 50% statistic. I raised my kids as a single dad, and I have five of them, right? So I have
Oh,
four daughters and a son. So
wow, good
they
for you.
were raised by a man, good or bad. None of them are, like I always joke and tease, and like you said, you got to laugh sometimes at the universe. None of my kids are in jail, so I succeeded, right?
Yeah.
I succeeded, right? They're all contributing to society. They're all great kids. They all have their character building moments, but I appreciate what you had to say. So, you have worked with many successful men around the globe. Can you tell the listeners exactly what is neuroscience and some of the processes you utilize to help men become limitless?
Yeah, so neuroscience is basically, if I'm going to, it's just the simplest term, it's basically how your brain and nervous system operates. And there's just a lot of new information that's coming out daily in terms of, okay, what are certain things that we can do to help improve our performance, to help improve our happiness levels? And these are, again, there's a lot of fad stuff out there as well, but it's also important to understand how our brain operates, because that can help us with things like learning, for example. So we know that, for example, studies have shown that testing is actually a thing that helps people learn better. I know people hate it. They're like, why do we need to do these tests? Why do we need to do that? But it's actually been shown to actually improve how you learn and your ability to learn. We also know that, for example, you need a good night's sleep, because that's when your memory actually consolidates in your brain. That's when the stuff that you learn throughout the day actually gets consolidated. So, for example, for men, if they're not sleeping very well, they're actually impacting their performance, they're impacting their memory. So these are different things that we take a look at. So when someone says something and says, okay, this is what I'm dealing with and this is a challenge, I always look, okay, we'll take a look at the business aspect. We'll look at the personal aspect from a psychology perspective, but then we'll take a look at it from a neuroscience perspective. That's what I'll do. And I'll say, okay, is there something underlying that we can do to really shift that a little bit? Right. And so, for example, one of the things at the emotional level, a lot of guys don't understand or don't believe that their emotions have a big impact on their decision making. But here's something: a lot of guys will write down goals and be very plain about them and not add any emotions to them. And it's very interesting. But studies, a lot of studies in Stanford, for example, when I was there, were being done on goals, motivation, and execution, and showed that the more emotions you actually put into your goals, especially while you're goal setting and actually reviewing your goals, the more likely you are to execute better, because you're going to be more persistent, you're going to be more passionate, and you're going to be more consistent when you have that a certain threshold of emotions attached to your goals. So a goal void of emotion is not going to be as executed as well as a goal that has an emotion attached to it, a very strong emotion. So these are elements that we add in to the work that we do. And more importantly, because this area of expertise that I've built over the years, it's a lot easier to get guys to shift, because I can tell someone, hey, you know what, you should do this, but it's not until they know the why that it really makes an impact. So if I share the science behind it, a lot of guys will be like, okay, that makes sense. I understand that. Right. I don't go into it deep because it doesn't have to, guys don't need to know what chemicals are working in the brain. But if they understand that certain things that they're doing is producing a chemical that's actually hurting them in some way, shape, or form, then they're going to be like, oh, okay, I won't do that anymore. It's just a way of actually adding on that additional proof for guys to actually change their behavior. So, long story short, a lot of the things that are happening in people's behavior has an underlying, you can say, neuroscience element to it. And that's one of the things that we can identify very easily.
I like that. And then, you're educating. people, again, like I always tell people, you got to work with the willing. And once you're working with the willing, and then you educate them, whether you dumb it down and they don't understand the chemistry behind it or the actual thought process. But if they can be taught a principle of how to figure it out, and like you said, add emotion to goals. And I see that all the time too, because I have specific goal setting worksheets I work through. And I'll say, well, why is that important to you? Because and they'll be, well, because I said so. Well, no, that's not good enough. Why is that important to you? What does it invoke in you? Because you're right. Once you tie an emotion to it, the likelihood of wanting to learn more about it or applying processes that'll help them deal with it to achieve their goal are so much higher. But if they're just brain dead about it, and I have a lot of people I sit down with that don't become my clients because they just aren't willing to connect. Their 6 inches isn't willing to be developed. They're not part of the willing, right? So you probably see that a lot.
Yeah, and that's where sometimes, because I work with men from all walks of life. Some are extremely successful, and sometimes they're not. I'm not going to say thick, but they've built a pattern of doing things, and breaking patterns is one of the things that we have to do. And so when it comes to the example that you shared, when it comes to goal setting and talking about having the emotions, I have to share with them and say, okay, when you have an emotion tied, if it's a particular emotion, that will actually release maybe a certain chemical. And guess what this chemical will do? It'll actually give you more energy, allow you to think more clearly, and actually get the job done more. Then when people will be like, okay, that makes sense. I should do that. That's more technical. And guys like to think more technical than emotional. So that's why I include some of the science elements, is because it brings a technicality to things, and it makes it easier for people to not understand, but actually move forward and actually do something different.
That's awesome. That's one thing I will have to introduce more in my practice. That's another thing, listeners. Podcasting teaches me just as much as it teaches you, and it continues to help me level up and never camp. So I'm always climbing to be a better version of myself to help out and serve others. So I appreciate that response. So Purdeep, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Giving a heck. I think we're just living in a world where we need to give a heck, especially now with what's happened with COVID. And I think a lot of the challenges that we're seeing in society, break it down. This is one thing. This is one of the reasons why I do what I do. If we help people be successful, and successful in the business, let's just say this is one area, then they'll be more likely to be successful in their relationship and be successful as a parent. If family units are more successful and happier and healthier, then we have stronger communities. And when we have stronger communities, then people work together and band together rather than working against each other, running to supermarkets and trying to hog all the toilet paper, rather than thinking, okay, how do I help my fellow neighbor? This is fundamentally what we need to do. And I think your podcast name says it all. It's about giving a heck. It's about giving a heck to our neighbors, because when we have a stronger community, and I say this very openly and directly to the business professionals I work with, if you want to make more money, ensure that the people you are serving are in a good economic status, that they're healthy, because a healthy person will actually spend money. An unhealthy person will not. An unhealthy community will not spend as much money. Therefore, the economics will not be as at the level where you want it to be. So I have a vested interest as a business professional to ensure that my community is healthy and happy, because they will spend more money and I will actually make more money as a result of that. So giving a heck can actually pay you back. But more importantly, we are human beings. This is one of the things that we have fundamentally forgotten. And that goes to the mindfulness aspect, because we at some point in time as an individual will always need something from someone at some point in time. We have to remember that.
Oh, exactly. So what you were saying, the thing that pops up in my mind all the time, and I teach on, and I was just talking about it with one of my daughters. She asked me about it because she remembered me talking about it as a kid. I used to say that I wish the village mentality would come back. And what is the village mentality? Everybody took care of one another. You may have had a rancher or a farmer that was wealthy beyond belief, but he always made sure that the general store, there was a blacksmith, there was the grocery store, like the general store, and he took care of everybody, because when they were happy, they didn't care that he had lots. because they knew that he would make sure they had food, they had shelter, and they were taken care of. And that village mentality from hundreds of years ago needs to come back. And you just mentioned that. We help out our local community. If we help out our local community, our local city's happy. If we help out our local city's happy, it helps out our province. If you're in the States, it helps out your state. We just need to get back to the principle of giving a heck about each other, right? That if you see somebody and they're, and people laugh at this. I've done it numerous times. I've been at the grocery store and had somebody in front of me putting groceries, take that off because they can't afford it. And I've said to the lady, how much is that? $30, $40, I'll pay for it. And I had a woman here last year openly weep. And I'm not telling people this to make myself look like a hero or a champion. I'm saying you need to do stuff like that. If it's the last $40 I have, and I'm broke and I still have food in the house and my bills are paid, that was a good $40 that I just spent to help that lady out with her kids, right? And the sad thing is she needed some education. I wish I could have educated her because the things that she was taking out were all the healthy things. Mm-hmm. Was sad, right? Yeah. The grapes, the apples, the bananas, like all the fruit, obviously they're expensive. But it was about $40. And why do I tell you that story is because we as a people need to care about everybody. And we need to start doing that now or our world is in trouble. We're going to continually spiral out of control and have people that go and load up on toilet paper and they're not thinking, oh, I don't need 12 packs of toilet paper. What about the person behind me? They need to wipe their butt too. It's just, but I've really enjoyed our time together. Well, our time is almost up. I want to respect your time and I want to respect our listeners' time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you?
Oh, the best way is simply you can find me on pretty much every social media channel. I'm mainly most active on LinkedIn and Instagram, and my handle is @Purdeep Sangha. Feel free to go to purdeepsangha.com as well. And there's a contact page there. If you're okay with it, I can also give a promo code for my book for your listeners if you like. If you go to completemanaudio.com and use a promo code Victory75, so the number 75 and Victory, all one word. So Victory75 at completemanaudio.com, you'll get 75% off.
Sweet. I'll make sure that all what you just said, I'll make sure my production team puts it into the show notes too, so people can find that. For the listeners that are new, giveaheck.com, go into the podcast portal. You'll find Purdeep there, his picture. You'll find the podcast access and simplified show notes, which will link you to everything that he just talked about, and especially the audiobook. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Purdeep. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck. Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.